I was lonesome to begin with. 13 years living in a featureless condo complex outside Richmond, Virginia, was like living in solitary confinement in a comfortable prison. My apartment is located by itself at the end of a bend of a hallway on the second floor of a 4-story building. It's the only apartment on that part of the floor, and it's located right by the stairs, so I can go in and out without seeing anyone. Every night, an Armenian family's arguments and bizarre music pulses through my ceiling, and during the day I can hear my neighbor's Jack Russell Terrier bark somewhere on my floor. That's all I know about my neighbors, and it accounts for almost all the human interaction I have. I get my groceries delivered. They're waiting for me at my door when I wake up on Wednesday mornings. I don't need to sign anything or greet a delivery man. And the longest I've gone without seeing anyone was 4 months and 16 days. I'm ashamed to admit I considered a mail-order bride 2 years ago. I picked her out from a lineup of glamour shots on an insecure website that lacked HTTPS access. I almost completed the transaction, was ready to wait the 4 to 6 week delivery window for Krista, but felt disgusted at myself and backed out before entering my credit card information. I feel terrible admitting this. I contract for the U.S. government and systems security. My job is to break into online government systems and then suggest security improvements. It's worrying how easy it is to get in, and they rarely take my professional advice, and that's all I'm allowed to say. I spend 13 hours every day with computer code and numbers. I eat at my desk, I never read, and I certainly never exercise. I often feel sick, and I think it's a combination of my lifestyle and lack of vitamin D. I never feel happy or even very sad, and I have trouble keeping track of weeks and months and days. And this is why I feel I'm a great candidate for the Rejuvenation Project. As an armchair environmentalist, I sympathize with your mission of digging out cemeteries and replacing them with urban gardens. I'm fascinated by your process of corpse rejuvenation, and I've always been curious about uploading a deceased person's consciousness into a new body and a self-sustaining computer. I'm confident companionship would both prolong my life and make me a happier, more thoughtful person. Please consider my application, and I look forward to hearing from you. All the best, Gregory Watterson, PhD. 3 weeks later, I received a heavy envelope in the mail with a return address from the Rejuvenation Project. I nervously opened the envelope and read the college admission-style response. I had been accepted into the program, but with condition. I still needed to pass a background check, psychological testing, and fill out lengthy paperwork. I wasn't nervous. I had to do this for the government all the time. I felt a small hum of excitement and emailed the program to set up an interview. A few days later, a small man appeared at my door. "Mr. Watterson," he said deliberately. I blushed. It was the first time I'd heard my own name spoken to me in weeks. He looked up at me with a wrinkled face. He had a cleft palate that left him with a permanent sneer. He didn't reach out his tiny hands for a handshake, and he wore dirty construction boots under an otherwise smart suit. "Come in," I croaked, my voice weak from disuse. He hurried past me, sat himself down on my plastic-encased couch with a crinkle, and opened up his briefcase. Inside were documents and a half-dozen empty plastic biohazard jars. "Sit down," he commanded. I sat. "I'll only need 30 minutes, he said while opening a binder from his briefcase. "I need to ask a few questions and make sure you're not one of those weirdos who wants to get one of these to fuck it. Are you one of these weirdos who wants to enter the program to fuck it?" "No," I responded quickly, surprised. "Good. You don't look like a weirdo who wants to fuck them. Have you ever abused drugs?" "No." He scribbled with a dirty pen he took from a hotel. "Been arrested for misdemeanor or felony, even if acquitted?" "I haven't." "Are you employed?" "I am. It's indicated on my application." "I don't read the applications," he said with a sneer. "I just ask questions." "Okay." "Will you be able to care for him or her?" You understand, this is like having somewhere between a dog and a child. Yes, I understand. But him or her? I asked. I'd prefer it to be a man. Why? Are you one of those weirdos who would be tempted to fuck it if it were a woman? He asked coldly. No, but I'd feel more comfortable with male companionship. That's fine, he responded, scribbling. I'll make a note of that and we'll see what we can do, he said absently, showing hospitality for the first time. Okay, I have what I need. I need you to piss in this cup and we'll take blood when we're finished. I pissed in the cup and he took my blood. He dipped strips in the fluid and nodded. You've been accepted, he said without looking up. Expect him in the next few days. He packed his belongings and let himself out of the apartment. A few days passed and there was a knock at my door at 2 p.m. exactly. I opened to see two identical twins in matching coveralls, their names sewn in blue-collar font on patches on their chests. Their names were Jim and Tim. Tim held onto a dolly that supported a body bag held in place with industrial straps, and Jim held a clipboard. Gregory Watterson, Jim commanded rather than asked. That's me, I croaked nervously. Where should we put him? Tim asked. Right here, come on in. They elbowed past me. Tim laid down the dolly and unstrapped the body bag. He pulled it onto the carpet, dragging the nylon across the floor. He unzipped the bag, revealing an obscured body encased in an extra layer of plastic. Sign, Jim commanded, pushing the clipboard to my chest. I tried to make small talk. So, you're twins? I asked. No, Jim and Tim responded simultaneously. I signed as Tim unwrapped the corpse like a Christmas gift. For the first time in years, I was overwhelmed with excitement. I handed the clipboard back to Jim and crouched down by Tim and my new friend. The corpse was bloated and specked with purple, and his penis hung to the left. Wiry hair shot out at weird angles like he'd been electrocuted. Tim took out a pair of scissors and cut the sutures that the undertaker had sewn to keep his mouth and asshole shut. A noxious wheeze of gas came out, and Tim buried his nose in his arm. Stand back and don't touch, Tim commanded. He's still a biohazard until we rev him up. Tim pulled a mesh hat out of a pocket on his utility belt and fixed it over the corpse's head. Jim slowly paced around my apartment, inspecting the bare walls. Take this and plug it in, Tim said. He held his head up like he was about to sneeze, but didn't. I plugged it into the wall and a small burst of ozone filled my nostrils. An electric hum buzzed around the corpse's brain. He twitched his fingers and toes. If a circuit shorts, don't worry, Jim said with his back to me, his eyes fixed to the walls. Takes a lot of juice to get him going. He'll be ready in a few hours. If he doesn't wake up, call us and we'll just bring a new one. He turned to me. That hat on him will take care of everything. He gave me a manila folder and nodded at Tim. Tim packed up the body bag and the plastic wrap and wheeled the dolly out of the apartment behind Jim. The whole process took about 5 minutes. I sat on the couch reading about my new friend. He worked as an electrician and died 14 years ago. His hobbies included math and breeding ferrets. He never married and left his estate to the local library. His name was Harry. The summary of his life was alarmingly short, and I felt sad wondering how brief mine would be. After 2 hours, Harry's eyes popped open eerily, and he stared at the ceiling without emotion. 45 minutes later, he began to jerk his arms and legs. He sat up, turned his head, and vomited a weird goo onto the carpet. He wiped his face with his forearm and turned to me. Sorry, he apologized. He looked around the apartment. This is a fine place, he said absently. How did I get here? I stammered, dumbfounded. Would you like a coffee or a glass of water? I asked, unsure what to say. That sounds fine. Harry smiled. Could you help me up? It would... If you happen to have a change of clothes, I'd be grateful, he nodded. We sat at the kitchen table over coffee. He wore an oversized Hard Rock Cafe t-shirt and baggy khakis that were in the back of my closet. He kept burping and apologizing, saying he didn't know what had come over him. I explained to him the process and what had brought him to me. He nodded curiously and thought silently with his hand on his chin. I asked him if he could remember anything. I remember, he paused. There was a shooting pain in my skull and I blacked out. No, it felt like I slept for a few days and I woke up here. We sat in silence. I didn't know where to begin and realized my conversation skills had atrophied over the years. Harry sighed and rested his cheek on his fist at an angle, leaning on the table. Are you hungry? I asked. No, but thank you, he responded politely. The clock ticked. Sorry, I'm not a very good conversationalist, he said with an embarrassed smile. Neither am I. I tapped my fingers on the table as we avoided eye contact. Over the next few days, Harry and I got to know each other a little bit. We talked about our jobs, and he explained the ins and outs of ferret breeding. He called it an art, which I thought was odd, but he was extremely passionate about it. He asked if he could keep ferrets in the apartment, and I lied, saying the apartment didn't allow pets, as the Jack Russell Terrier barked a few apartments over. He eyed me suspiciously, but didn't say anything. I went back to working long hours and asked to remain undisturbed as my job requires extreme attention. Harry was fine with this and spent most of his time reading, doing math problems, and watching television. And I could tell he was pretty bored. He spent a lot of time in the bathroom vomiting. I used the restroom after him once and he hadn't flushed, and black and green goo filled the toilet bowl with floating chunks of meat. Concerned, I asked him if he was okay. To be honest, I'm feeling a bit under the weather, he said with sad eyes, wiping the remnants of sick away from his mouth. I continued working as he deteriorated over the span of a few weeks. He never ate, and his torso began to cave in. His hair fell out and his fingernails popped off. I woke up one morning and found him sitting at the kitchen table. He sadly asked me to sit down. I'm sorry, he began, but I'm in quite a bit of agony. It's been great spending time with you, but I simply can't continue living like this. It's just not the same, he explained. With all respect, I'd like to ask you a favor. Anything, I responded. Put me out of my misery. I read the paperwork from the program last night, and it's clear it isn't homicide because you can't kill the dead. He paused. Will you do this for me? You're my only friend. His eyes were so sad I couldn't say no. He said he wanted it to be quick, and all I could think of was suffocating him, and he said that was fine. I pulled some plastic wrap and twine out of the kitchen cabinet and tied his legs and arms to a chair. It's been great getting to know you, I said sadly. The pleasure's been mine, he responded with a smile. Okay. You can start, he said. I wrapped the plastic wrap around his head a dozen times, sealing off his nose and mouth. He struggled for a few minutes, but then finally went limp. I unwrapped the plastic and saw his face. His eyes were half shut and his mouth open. I held my hand under his nose and felt no breath. I called the number of the Rejuvenation Project and explained what had happened. Within an hour, Jim and Tim were back at the apartment. You'd be surprised at how often this happens, Jim said, as Tim wrapped him up and put his body in a bag. Sign here. He handed me paperwork and I sighed. They left without saying goodbye. I felt lonesome without Harry for the next few weeks, but over time the sadness went away and I just went back to work. Loneliness set back in over the months, and I toyed with calling the project and giving it another shot. It seemed more trouble than it was worth, though, so I decided against it. Around Christmas time, the loneliness got to be too much. I got back online and ordered a bride from Thailand. In the next 4 to 6 weeks, I'd be married, and I guess that doesn't sound so bad.